The Walking Dead universe is defined by its complex characters, each shaped by a world turned upside down. But where did it all begin? Before the chaos, before the fights for survival, there was one man whose journey invites us into the apocalypse. His story sets the stage for everything that follows, revealing how the collapse reshapes justice, family, and leadership in a broken world. Let's dive into his origin. Rick Grimes. Rick Grimes doesn't just walk into the apocalypse, he wakes up in it. Shot in the line of duty as a sheriff's deputy in King County, Georgia, Rick slips into a coma before the world falls apart. When he finally opens his eyes, he finds an empty, silent hospital littered with the dead. No news, no help, just a terrifying new reality ruled by walkers. And that moment, waking up alone in a world that's completely changed, is what sets Rick apart as a protagonist. Before all the chaos, Rick was a principled lawman, a devoted husband to Lori and a father to Carl. He lived by the rules, protective of his family and community. But when the apocalypse hits, those rules don't just bend, they shatter. Yet Rick clings to them, becoming the reluctant leader who tries to hold on to some sense of law and order amid the madness. Here's the thing, Rick didn't see the collapse like everyone else. He skips it entirely, thrown straight into the aftermath. That means the audience experiences the end of the world through his confused, desperate eyes, piecing together the horrors along with him. It's why his obsession with justice, family, and rebuilding civilization feels so real and personal. Rick's moral compass gets tested over and over, but one choice stands out. When he defeats Negan, arguably his biggest enemy, Rick spares him instead of killing him. This decision sends ripples through the survivor communities. It's not just about mercy, it's about what kind of world Rick wants to rebuild. One without endless cycles of revenge, where punishment isn't just about destruction, but about holding on to humanity. Of course, not everyone agrees on Rick's legacy. Some see his mercy as weakness or cruelty that lets a monster live, while others view it as a visionary step towards something better. But it's exactly this tension between justice and survival, law and chaos, that cements Rick as the moral heart and conflicted leader of The Walking Dead. But if you thought waking up to a nightmare was hard, just wait until you meet Shane Walsh, Rick's best friend who doesn't share his idealism. Shane Walsh is the definition of survival pragmatism gone off the rails. Rick's childhood best friend and fellow deputy, Shane believes Rick is dead after the outbreak and steps up to lead the survivor camp. He quickly forms a complicated relationship with Lori, Rick's wife, which throws a wrench into loyalty and survival ethics from the very start. Before you dismiss Shane as just a jealous rival, hear me out, he's much more than a bitter ex-buddy. Shane embodies the ruthless mindset the apocalypse demands: quick decisions, hard kills, and no room for sentimentality. While Rick clings to ideals of law and order, Shane pushes the limits of morality, willing to sacrifice anything or anyone to keep people alive. From securing the camp's perimeter at all costs to hunting potential threats within the group, Shane embraces a brutal realpolitik view. His willingness to kill walkers without hesitation contrasts sharply with Rick's more hopeful, sometimes naive approach. It's like Rick represents civilization's fading ideals, and Shane is the cold, harsh face of the New World Order. But here's where it gets dark. Shane's pragmatism quickly spirals into personal obsession. His affair with Lori and jealousy over Rick's return lead to multiple violent confrontations, including attempts to kill Rick. This isn't just survival pragmatism, it's personal betrayal mixing with desperation, creating a tragic cocktail of good intentions corrupted by human flaws. Fans have long debated Shane's legacy. Was he the necessary monster the apocalypse needed, or just a cautionary example of how quickly power and jealousy destroy us? Some argue that Shane's harsh realism was closer to the truth of survival, foreshadowing choices Rick would later make. Others see him as a deeply flawed man undone by his own demons, a counterpart to Rick's idealism, but no less tragic. Shane's origin is a mess of loyalty, betrayal, and survival ethics all tangled together, forcing players to confront uncomfortable questions about what it really takes to live when the world ends. But if you think playing moral opposition this close to home is intense, wait until you meet someone who lives off the grid and answers to nobody. Next up, Daryl Dixon. Daryl Dixon isn't just another survivor. He's a character that was created entirely for the TV series, with zero direct counterpart in the original comics. From the moment he shows up, he's a volatile, socially isolated hunter who knows how to survive, but struggles to connect. Raised in rural Georgia under an abusive, alcoholic father and overshadowed by his older brother Merle, Daryl's rough exterior screams redneck stereotype. But here's the thing, that surface is a mask for deep trauma and loneliness. Before you roll your eyes at the typical tough guy with a crossbow, hear me out. Daryl's childhood wasn't just tough, it was brutal and isolating. His brother Merle was in and out of juvenile detention, leaving Daryl to fend for himself, crafting a fiercely independent survivalist who initially reacts to people with suspicion and anger. His defensive hostility makes perfect sense when you realize he's protecting himself from a lifetime of neglect and pain. Officially, Daryl starts as a wild card, gruff, angry, and hard to handle, but as the series progresses, he evolves into something much richer, a loyal protector who forms tight emotional bonds, especially with Carol. He shifts from a loner to a co-leader and cornerstone of the group, showing a fierce loyalty that surprises everyone. His growth is one of the most compelling arcs on the show. Fans have endlessly debated Daryl's sexuality and the nature of his emotionally intense but mostly non-romantic relationships. The Carol ship, Daryl and Carol, is legendary, full of deep affection and unspoken feelings, but ambiguous enough to fuel years of speculation. Some interpretations even see Daryl as asexual, emphasizing his profound need for connection without conventional romance. Here's where it gets weird. Despite being the ultimate tough guy, Daryl's heart is a puzzle wrapped in trauma and longing. His outsider origins combined with his transformation from a volatile loner to a beloved protector make him one of the most complex characters on The Walking Dead. But if you think Daryl's story is complicated, wait until you meet Carol Pelletier, whose painful past and surprising rise to power create one of the show's most unforgettable journeys. Carol Pelletier starts as the ultimate underdog, a timid, broken woman trapped in a nightmare of domestic abuse long before the apocalypse even begins. Married to Ed Pelletier, whose cruelty toward her and their daughter Sophia is both physical and emotional, Carol's early life is marked by fear and helplessness. She arrives at the survivor camp carrying the weight of trauma, barely able to assert herself while living under the constant shadow of her husband's violence. But here's where it gets weird. That vulnerability lays the groundwork for one of the darkest, most fascinating transformations in the entire Walking Dead saga. After Ed dies in a walker attack, finally freeing her from his grip, Carol slowly sheds her timid skin. It's not a gentle change, it's brutal and ruthless. She evolves into a fierce protector who doesn't just wait for threats to come to her. She takes preemptive action, often lethal, before danger can touch her people. Think about it. This is a woman once defined by victimhood turning into a master strategist and cold executor of survival. She's capable of things no one saw coming, like quietly killing 2 infected community members at the prison to stop a deadly flu outbreak from spreading, or eliminating threats with an icy detachment that blurs the line between hero and villain. Carol is simultaneously inspiring and terrifying, embodying how trauma can fuel empowerment but also warp morality into shades of gray nobody wants to fully grapple with. Her relationship with Daryl Dixon adds even more layers. Fans debate endlessly whether their connection is rooted in romantic love, trauma bonding, or a deep platonic understanding born from shared loss and hardship. Daryl sees Carol's strength and pain without judgment, creating one of the show's most compelling and ambiguous partnerships. Their dynamic mirrors Carol's entire arc, complicated, resilient, and defying easy labels. Carol's story is a brutal reminder that, in The Walking Dead, survival isn't sweet or clean. It's messy, painful, and often morally questionable. Yet her journey from abused housewife to lethal survivor also stands as one of the most profound portrayals of personal empowerment born from the ashes of trauma. But if you think Carol's ruthless reinvention is wild, just wait until we switch gears to Glenn Rhee, whose origin story takes survival in an entirely different direction. Glenn started out as the most unlikely hero, a pizza delivery boy with a background that was as ordinary as it gets. Raised in a big city, Atlanta in the show, Portland in the comics, Glenn's working-class roots gave him a real-world resourcefulness that the apocalypse turned into a lethal skill. Before the outbreak, the biggest risk he took was weaving through traffic to get a hot slice delivered on time. After, those same urban navigation skills became superpowers. When Rick first appeared lost and desperate in walker-infested Atlanta, it was Glenn who led him to safety, mapping out the city like it was his backyard. He didn't just scavenge for supplies, he ran life-or-death errands, slipping through the undead because he knew how to read the city's veins. He wasn't flashy, just fast and smart, and that quickly made him indispensable to the group. Glenn's relationship with Maggie Green anchored his story emotionally and politically. What started as a fragile romance on the Green family farm grew into a powerhouse alliance. When they married and expected a child, Glenn evolved from errand runner to a community leader, helping shape the new society with a grounded sense of loyalty and hope. He was the heart of the group as much as he was the guy you called when you needed to disappear and scavenge. Then came the deaths. Glenn's on-screen fate became TV legend. First, the shocking fake-out in Season 6 that had fans convinced he was Zombie Chow, only to reveal he survived behind a body shield, which was honestly a relief nobody saw coming. But none of that compared to the brutal reality of his final death at the hands of Negan, bludgeoned with Lucille on camera in one of the rawest, most controversial scenes the series ever aired. The emotional fallout rippled through fans and characters alike, sparking debates that still echo today. Here's the thing. Glenn's rise from a nobody delivery guy to a heroic figure with deep emotional stakes shows how the apocalypse turns the ordinary into extraordinary, and the way his deaths were handled, both the fake and the real, fueled some of the franchise's most intense fan drama. But if you think Glenn's story ends here, wait until you hear about Maggie Green, the woman who carried his legacy forward with fire and grit. Maggie Green starts off as Herschel's eldest daughter, living a sheltered life on their family farm in rural Georgia. Raised under her father's strong religious and principled influence, she grew up with solid moral values, but a fairly naive view of the world beyond those fields. The apocalypse hit while she was still used to the safety of the farm, barricaded away from the horrors that would soon define her life. Before you think of her as just a typical farm girl, hear me out. Maggie's transformation is one of the most compelling arcs in the entire franchise. She begins as this rebellious college dropout, athletic and headstrong, but largely inexperienced in actual survival. When Rick's group arrives, she's still clinging to that familiar life, but the data shows she quickly adapts, stepping up on supply runs, learning to handle weapons, even fighting off walkers head-on. Here's the kicker. Maggie doesn't just survive. She grows into a hardened leader, eventually becoming the head of the Hilltop Colony and one of the key figures opposing Negan and the Saviors. That farm girl evolves into the pragmatic and tough community builder balancing faith, vulnerability, and brutal necessity. She pushes people to unite under Rick's vision instead of succumbing to fear or power grabs, but here's where it gets complicated. The loss of Glenn, the love of her life, in one of the series' most gut-wrenching moments, shifts Maggie from hopeful to fierce, and at times unforgiving. Fans debate endlessly about how that trauma drives her leadership style. Is she justified in her ruthless decisions, or has grief clouded her judgment? Show Maggie often appears bolder and more independent than her comic book counterpart, where she's portrayed with more internal doubt and vulnerability, and that's not even the full story. Some fans argue the TV version underplays the depth of her emotional struggles, while others appreciate Maggie's ability to keep going, leading with a mix of faith and cold pragmatism in a world that's lost both. Her religious roots clash constantly with the brutal realities she faces, creating moments where you can see her wrestling with what it means to lead when everyone is broken. So the woman who once knew only peaceful farm life becomes a central political and emotional force in the apocalypse's new world order. Not bad for a girl who barely left her family's porch before everything fell apart. If you think Maggie's arc packs complexity, wait until we dive into Michonne Hawthorne's mysterious past next. Michonne is either the most iconic loner in The Walking Dead or a walking myth overnight legend, and I can prove it. Her origins are one of the few times the comics and TV series diverge in major ways, which makes dissecting her character a wild trip through grief and survival. In the comics, she's a former lawyer and divorced mother with 2 missing daughters, a backstory that sets her up as both a fighter and a deeply thoughtful moral compass. But the TV show retools her completely. Here, Michonne has lost a young son named Andre Anthony, and her boyfriend, catapulting her into a shell of solitude and razor-sharp combat skills. The TV Michonne first appears as this mysterious figure, think katana-wielding ghost, with 2 armless, jawless pet walkers dragging along behind her. It's such a striking image that practically screams, "Don't mess with me." But there's more beneath the surface than just badass sword fighting. Her isolation isn't just practicality, it's a coping mechanism forged by trauma, the kind of trauma that blurs the line between humanity and monstrosity. Using those walkers as camouflage, she literally walks between the dead and the living, embodying the apocalypse's liminal space. Over time, she's slowly drawn into Rick Grimes's orbit, going from enigma to essential emotional and tactical core of the group. She steps into roles like Alexandria's head of security and becomes a surrogate mother to Carl and Judith, filling out the family unit that the apocalypse shattered. Eventually, she becomes Rick's partner and a leader herself in the Alexandria community, proving she's not just a lone wolf, but a rare breed who thrives in connection and responsibility. What's also fascinating is how her story generates cultural conversations. Michonne is one of the few examples of Black motherhood front and center in a major genre series, handled with complexity instead of cliché. Fans debate how the show's choice to replace her two missing daughters with a deceased son reshapes the portrayal of grief and parenting for Black women in the apocalypse. It's a subtle but significant difference that changes the emotional layers of her character. Still, despite those differences, the core of Michonne remains: the deeply human struggle to reclaim family and identity when everything else is gone. She's grief made flesh, who refuses to be swallowed by darkness, instead carving out a bloody but hopeful path forward. But if you think Michonne's story of tragic isolation is intense, wait until you meet the most infamously ruthless survivor of them all, Negan Smith. Negan walks into the story like a showman with a baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire named Lucille, and suddenly the apocalypse gets a whole lot darker. He's not just a villain, he's the brutal mayor of chaos, a man who runs the Saviors like a protection racket mixed with a circus act. His introduction is unforgettable, charismatic, terrifying, and absolutely ruthless. Before you think he's just a bad guy with style, hear me out. Negan isn't a random psychopath. He builds a twisted empire by enforcing strict, violent order. The Saviors demand half the supplies from every nearby community, promising protection that really means submission. It's governance by fear, and everyone knows Lucille is the law. His debut moment kicks off with a bang. Literally, Negan coldly murders Glenn Rhee in front of Maggie and the rest, crushing morale and shattering the group's hope. That scene didn't just shock viewers, it flipped the narrative script. Negan dominates not just by power, but by psychological terror. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was mental warfare. But here's where it gets complicated. After Rick's coalition defeats the Saviors, Negan spends years locked up in Alexandria prison. He could have been killed, but Rick chooses imprisonment as a symbol of a new order, one where cruelty is punished, but life is valued. Over those years, Negan's persona cracks and reforms. When he escapes later, he's not the same monster we met. He's a layered anti-hero whose charisma remains, but whose motives blur between self-interest and a strange sort of redemption. This evolution sparks endless fan debates. Is Negan's redemption arc genuine or a narrative convenience? Do his monstrous acts get softened too much to make him relatable? Some fans see him as a tragic figure who grew beyond his brutal past, while others say he should never be forgiven for what he did, especially the deaths he caused. The tension between villain and anti-hero makes Negan one of the most provocative figures in the Walking Dead story. Negan's origin story blends absurd theatricality with horrifying brutality and a twisted vision of leadership. He shows how a villain can become the story's beating heart, forcing us to wrestle with questions about morality, power, and whether someone who ruled through fear can ever truly change. And with a legacy defined by Lucille, he remains unforgettable, part dictator, part showman, all nightmare. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.